Hello everyone, welcome to Asura Psych, and today I'm going to be answering community questions for the second time. So if you want to see a video similar to this, there's a first one as well, but all I'm going to be doing is answering questions related to personality typology, psychology in general, myself, whatever it is that the community asked of me in my community tab where I posted the question asking for responses. Let's get into it. So the first question is a fun one. It comes from Greg Bogue, and he asks, if everyone in the world was going to be forcibly reprogrammed to a single MBTI type, similar to the Dollhouse TV show, which personality do you think would be the best to set everyone to? So this is an interesting question because it's almost like asking which type do you think is the best personality type, but I don't think it's actually asking that. It's asking which type would be the best if all humans were essentially one type. And interestingly enough, I would probably say either ISTJs or ESTJs, and there's a specific reason why I would choose one of these types over, say, the other types, because these types tend to be the best at preservation. And I think from a statistical standpoint, if we had too many intuitives in the world, it would be disruptive to the long course term of human behavior. I think that these sensing types tend to keep the intuitive types in check, which is why there's less intuitive types biologically, genetically, and the intuitive types tend to be the ones who are a little bit more risky and want to push things forward in terms of technology. So if everyone in the world was an intuitive type, there would be a constant desire for growth and change, and while this could potentially be a good thing, it also would be more likely to end up in destruction or some sort of bad outcome. Where if you had ISTJs or ESTJs, they would be able to maintain things and keep things running smoothly for a very long period of time without much risk. There would be a lot more staticness to how they're going to be dealing with difficult situations, and there would be strong protocol, very bureaucratic type of approach to the world. So I think that the STJs would probably be the best, and one of the only types who would have a likely good outcome if every person in the world was set to a single type. John Doe asks, what do you look for when you determine someone's type? Expressions, emotions, mannerisms, what questions do you ask? So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil the sessions, but essentially I am looking for things like emotions and how they're expressing things. And to me, it's not how you answer a question. It's not the answer that you give me when you're answering a question. It's the way in which you say that answer and what that implies about you. So I have specific questions that are meant to almost kind of trigger certain cognitive function reactions. And it's important for me to see how certain types are going to react to those types of questions. Because if I find that they get frustrated with a certain question, or they don't get frustrated with a certain question, or they're able to give me long-winded explanations in regards to these things, they're more likely to have certain cognitive functions, and that's going to point me in the right direction. Now, typing is a very hard thing to do in 1 hour. And of course, not all of my typing services are going to be 100% accurate, which is why I will tell usually most people that I'm saying I'm not here to 100% give you your type. I'm here to point you in the right direction and give you clarity regarding your type, which is why most of the time I give people a top 2 with one that I'm leaning heavily towards in regard to their type. But yes, I do look for things like mannerisms. There are certain speech patterns, things of that nature, body movements that are correlative to type and can also point me in the right direction, but it's nothing that's definitive. And I know the people who use body language as a primary source of typing might say different, but that's not how I do it. To me, those things are more so just correlative and pointing me in the right direction. MLD05 asks, studies have shown that CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, can rewire the brain's prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus, changing how it functions in order to adapt to the stressful environment. What are your thoughts on how CPTSD may affect MBTI cognitive functions? So this is a great question, and it's one that's kind of hard to answer because almost no research has been done on MBTI or cognitive functions in relation to personality disorders or mental disorders in general. And the issue with this is that it's hard for me to give some sort of long-term answer related to this because we don't even know how to operationally define cognitive functions in terms of scientific measurement accurately, which is why you don't see anyone publishing any sort of measurement trying to actually measure cognitive functions on a psychological scale that would meet scientific standards, and this is a problem. So we can't begin to measure how it's going to affect someone with disorders if we can't even effectively measure how it's going to be with a normal individual who isn't impacted by some sort of traumatic stress. Now, I think that traumatic stress, things related to that, extreme disorders within the mind that can affect the cognition and the wiring of the neural pathways can certainly cause large issues in regards to how a type is going to function and in which way their cognitive functions are going to work, and they may even appear to be some sort of other type. Whether or not they're actually changing type or the functions are changing order is something that I'm unsure of. Now, certain people propose the theory that yes, people can either change type or that these people are going to have functions that are going to be working in different orders or subconscious or unconscious depending on their level of stress and disorder, but that's not something I can actually say with certainty. But that is a good question. It's an area of research for the future. Soldier67 asks, what are some key connections or patterns of similarity you've seen in MBTI and human psychology? So I guess you're asking, how does MBTI relate to more scientific psychology? Well, this is also an interesting question because I've seen a lot of similarities because, of course, Jung was a psychiatrist. He wasn't just some amateur person out on the streets doing random psychology work. He knew a lot about what he was doing, and he's developed a lot of great theoretical models for psychology and the mind and the subconscious and unconscious and things related to that. Now, in my opinion, MBTI and cognitive functions in general are most related to a cognitive psychology theory known as information processing theory, which essentially shows in information processing theory, it almost treats the mind like a computer in that you put in some sort of input and it goes through certain processes that lead to certain outcomes. And I think that MBTI is almost saying, like, here's a model of information processing based on, like the dominant function and the repressed function, but it also proposes where ideas and human behavior may struggle to meet some sort of good standard because they're not being used in some preferential order related to the problem at hand. So I do think that there's quite a bit of relation to MBTI and cognitive function theory to psychology overall. And of course, it certainly seems like it, but it is more of a kind of psychodynamic approach in that it is talking about things like the unconscious, which is something that you don't typically see in like clinical psychology, but in the more psychodynamic approaches where you're willing to talk about these things, Freudian theories, Jungian approaches, these are quite normal, and you even see a lot of these types of things in a lot of therapy approaches. Now, psychodynamic approaches and talking about the unconscious is not something that you see as much in modern psychology because most of modern psychology is related to like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're trying to reroute someone's perceptions of the problem that they have so they can orient themselves better towards the world and the issues that they're facing. And this most oftentimes doesn't involve trying to dig down into the unconscious, but instead make the conscious things that they're perceiving more better oriented so they can face the problems face on instead of trying to back away from them. Carrie Sand asks how to have an enjoyable conversation with an ISTJ. And the reason this one stuck out to me because I think it's important to recognize that any and all of the types can certainly have interesting conversations. One of my old coworkers, I've talked about it in some of my older videos, was an ISTJ, and I had very interesting conversations with this person. And I think it's kind of almost absurd that people think that you can't have interesting conversations with certain people, especially across the intuitive sensing axis. You think that people just, they can't reach you on certain levels, and yeah, you're gonna struggle to meet in the middle sometimes, but I really think that it's important to try and do that because I have a video a few weeks back, a month or two back, where I talk about sensing and intuition, and I recommend checking that out because both of these sides of this spectrum, sensing and intuition, can meet in the middle and talk about things that are going to be relative to both of them. And I think it's important to recognize that this middle point is exceptionally important for all of the axes in MBTI, especially the sensing and intuitive one, where people tend to think that there's this huge difference, when in reality, it's not that much different. I can talk to, an ISTJ about things that I enjoy, like video games, and we can have great conversations. Yeah, I might lose him if I get too abstract or I start talking about psychology and things in these fields, but if I'm able to bring these things down to earth and talk about maybe like practical applications of these things, then you'll find that, oh wow, these people are interested in these types of things that I'm interested in. You just have to talk to them in a way that's going to get them to get on board with the idea that you're presenting. And then that's important for them to do as well. It might be harder for the sensing type to get out of that realm of realism and say, hey, look at these ideas related to this thing that I enjoy. But both sides of the spectrum can do this, and I think it's important to realize this if you want to have good communications with all types. How, H-A-O, asks, studying tips and techniques that you as an INTJ find helpful. So this is something that's interesting for me because I actually am a terrible studier. I don't study as much as I should, even in graduate level classes. But one thing that I found recently that's helped me is digitally taking notes on my phone instead of like a computer or on paper. And this is because on my phone in like my notepad app, I'm able to take more like bullet point notes and I don't have to worry about handwriting, and I can just quickly jot down what I need to jot down that's related to whatever it is that I'm reading about in my chapter. I used to take down kind of physical notes, but I found myself never looking over them. But my phone is always on me. I always have it there, and I can upload my notes to like my Google Drive or something. And therefore, if I'm thinking about something and I go, there's that thing from that one class or that one book that I read, but I want to look at it, but I can't remember what it is, I just open the note app on my phone and go see what it is that I was looking at. So that's helped me, as someone who doesn't take notes very well, taking more like bullet type notes on my phone. And other than that, setting aside actual time to do studying is really important. Some people are going to be able to study more than others and get more information out of that, or they're going to need to study more because they're not getting information as easily, and that's completely fine. Some people are able to kind of just gloss over a chapter once and get the general concepts. That's more so how I study, and having those type of bullet point notes is really helpful for me, because then I can look back at like a word or two related to the chapter or whatever it is that I was reading within that chapter and bring back what I was thinking about, and it all just kind of comes back to me, especially during discussion. Then I don't have to like flip through my notebook. I can just do a quick scroll and find what it is that I need to find. So for the last question, Alex15 asks, does studying psychology change the way you see and what you think of human beings? And has something you ever learned about the human mind ever scared you? So yes, psychology has certainly changed the way in which I kind of view and approach people. It's definitely given me a better perspective in regards to patience, in that I try to do my best with being patient with people if I see that they're struggling from some sort of mental disorder or stress. It's very easy to kind of push off somebody who's annoying or frustrating because maybe they have some sort of social disorder, maybe they have a mood disorder, maybe you don't want to deal with them. But approaching these types of people with some sort of patience can be very beneficial, not only for them, but for you as well, because it's good to be able to do that. It's good to be able to communicate with people who are going to have these types of issues, because you're going to meet a lot of them in your life, most likely. There's going to be people who are facing issues. Now, in regards to has something I've ever learned scared me about human mind, it's definitely an interesting question, because I don't think anything is really scary related to mental disorders in and of themselves. And to me, it's not that people with disorders are scary. It's more so the dark things that people who don't have disorders can do in this world that I think are the more terrifying things. When you think about just the darkest aspects of human behavior and people who are completely sane and do awful and terrible things, to me, that's far worse than someone who is having some sort of disorder and they do something bad, and it's not something that they would have consciously done if they had the choice, over the matter itself. So yeah, I think that human behavior and the human condition itself is something that is quite interesting, and that's why I love psychology, is because I get to study these types of things, and it really is interesting to see how people with disorders go through certain problems and how they have to deal with these types of things. All right, everybody, I'm sorry I couldn't get to every question that was there on the list. I am planning to do a video like this, maybe once every month or two. I don't want to do them too often because it'll get repetitive. But just to remind you, if you're interested in asking me questions personally, I do a Patreon monthly private live stream, once a month, of course, for only $5 over on my Patreon. So I suggest checking that out. The next one will probably be in a week or two. And because there's usually only a few people there, I'm able to interact with people very much one-on-one and answer their questions personally. So if you'd like to support me and also get the chance to ask me questions, consider checking me out on Patreon. The link will be down in the description box below. I would like to remind everybody that I also do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asurapsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.